Let's be real, we're surrounded by plastic. It keeps our food fresh, makes our cars lighter, it's everywhere. But its greatest strength, the fact that it lasts forever, has created this absolutely massive global challenge. So today, we're going to dig into a really powerful solution that gets to the root of the problem.
And here's the crazy paradox of plastic, right? We've engineered this miracle material that can stick around for hundreds of years, but we use a huge chunk of it, especially packaging, for just a couple of minutes before we toss it. And that disconnect, right there, is the heart of the plastic waste crisis.
So what if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if the problem isn't the material itself, but the choices we make on the drawing board, long before that plastic thing ever exists? If you think about it that way, it stops being a waste problem and becomes a design problem. And that's exciting, because design problems have design solutions.
Okay, so here's the game plan. First, we'll unpack that plastic paradox. Then we'll dive into what it really means to design for a circle. We'll get into the nitty-gritty with the golden rules, look at why this is such a complicated global puzzle, and finally, explore what it actually takes to make all this happen.
All right, let's jump in. What does it even mean to design for a circle? Well, instead of the old straight line, make, use, and throw away, the goal is to create a closed loop. We want materials that can be used, recovered, and then used again. And the whole thing kicks off with a concept called eco-design. Now, eco-design isn't some fancy add-on you sprinkle on at the end. The key here is that it's baked into the DNA of a product from the very, very beginning. It's about asking right from the start, what's the environmental impact of this thing going to be across its entire life?
And a perfect way to think about this is the waste hierarchy. Look at what's at the very top. The absolute best thing we can do is prevent waste in the first place. Next best is to reuse what we already have. Recycling, and this is important, is actually the third best option. So the whole point of smart design is to keep materials as high up on this pyramid as possible.
Okay, so if recycling is a key part of this circle, we're going to need a blueprint, right? A set of rules. Well, there is one, and these are what you could call the golden rules of design that give plastic the best shot at a second life.
It seems like it should be a simple question, but the answer is all in the details. A bunch of very specific, very intentional choices made by a designer. Let's break down some of the big ones. Okay, let's look at the good versus the bad. On the left, good design is all about simplicity. Using a single type of plastic, a monomaterial, makes it super easy to sort. Using clear or light colors is huge because that recycled plastic can then be turned into almost anything. Now on the right, you've got the troublemakers. Those multi-layer plastics, like in some chip bags, are a nightmare to separate. Dark colors contaminate the batch, meaning the recycled plastic can only be made into more black plastic. And those full-body plastic sleeves, they can totally confuse the sorting machines at recycling plants, sending the whole thing straight to the landfill.
And the list goes on. You want to avoid stuff like PVC, which can be pretty nasty in the recycling process. You need to make sure different parts, like the bottle and the cap, can be separated easily. And this is a big one. You have to avoid special additives or barriers that might protect the food inside, but basically poison the plastic for any future use.
So, if these rules seem pretty straightforward, you're probably asking, why doesn't every single package follow them? And that is a great question, because the reality, well, it's a lot more complicated.
Get this. There are over 100 different sets of these design guidelines floating around the world. 100. They're all a little different. Sometimes they even contradict each other. And here's the real kicker. Almost none of them are mandatory. It creates total confusion for companies trying to sell products in different countries.
Smart design is also this really tricky balancing act. First, of course, the package has to do its main job, protecting what's inside. Second, it has to follow those waste hierarchy goals. But third, and this is huge, it has to work with the actual recycling system in the place where it's sold. You could design the world's most recyclable bottle, but if the local facility can't handle it, it ends up in the landfill anyway. Okay, enough with the theory. Let's make this super practical. We're going to look at an object we all know, a simple PET water bottle. What does good eco-design look like here?
Check this out. Every single piece of the bottle matters. The body should be clear PET. The label needs to be small and not made of PVC. The glue has to be the kind that washes off easily. Now the cap, it should be a different type of plastic, one that floats. Why? Because at the recycling plant, they can just flood the whole batch and the caps float to the top while the bottles sink. It's a super simple way to separate them. And finally, no printing directly on the plastic itself. Each little choice adds up to decide if this bottle gets a second life.
So, we have the knowledge, we have the design principles, the blueprint exists.
The big question now is, how do we go from having a few well-designed products to having a system where everything is designed this way?
And here's what pretty much everyone is starting to agree on. Companies doing this voluntarily is a fantastic start, but it's not enough to get us where we need to be. To really make this happen at scale and create a level playing field, we need policy. Governments have to get involved.
And governments have about 4 main tools in their toolbox. First, you can just ban the really bad stuff. Second, you can create design regulations, like saying all new bottles must contain a certain amount of recycled plastic. Third, taxes, making brand new plastic more expensive than recycled plastic. And fourth, this really powerful idea called Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. This basically flips the script and says to the company, hey, that packaging you made, you're on the hook for dealing with it when the customer's done. All of a sudden, there's a real financial incentive to make it as easy and cheap to recycle as possible.
Which really brings us back to the main takeaway of all this. The fate of a piece of plastic, whether it becomes a valuable resource or just more pollution, is pretty much sealed right there on the drawing board before a single pellet of plastic has even been melted.
So that's the question we're left with, isn't it? The very same human ingenuity and design choices that helped create this massive challenge. Could that be our most powerful tool for building a cleaner future? It really makes you think.